Good morning. I thank you for the privilege of addressing the group and for Sages serving mimosas right before I began speaking. So this has very little literature basis. This is my experience, and a couple things I put down in my qualifications, but I didn't mention. I signed a really bad first contract, and I subsequently renegotiated that. I worked in private practice in a small group for 6 years. I moved to a different city, joined a larger, same-size group, larger practice pattern, eventually moved to being an employed physician. So I've signed a number of different contracts. And the other thing I'll tell you that's not on there, the last couple of years I've been involved in hiring people and trying to help them sort through their job and looking from the employer's side. Biggest thing I'll tell you, if any of you get a contract and you want to send me the contract, I would love it. I've been asking my residents to do this for years, so I review it. I don't really care about the salary on there. White that out. I'm really interested in the language because the language is very different from contract to contract, but there's a common theme. So if you sign a contract, I'd love to have it. Once again, the money amounts really don't matter to me, the language is, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on. I'm going to assume at this point that you've located a place, you've interviewed, you went there, you didn't think they were horrible people, and they're at the point where they're offering your contract. By the way, the first visit is not where you talk about money or the contract, unless they bring it up first. There's usually 2 visits if you're going to be successful, so don't worry about seeing the contract the first time through. The first time through is to see if you like this place, you'd want to live there. So the goals of the talk are to look at, once you've seen the practice, what type of practice do you really want, and how is that reflected in the contract? Recognizing things that are in a contract that are common, that you'll see over and over, and hopefully you'll know, and then understanding how you negotiate from there. It's not a simple, this is the contract, take it or leave it. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it isn't. And I'll get down to the final thing. This is what will keep you staying where you are, is what is a fair contract? A fair contract is fair to both parties, not just to you, it's to your employer too. So another theme here that I'll tell you, and my residents that I tell this don't always believe me, the first thing they want to look at the contract is the salary number that's right up front. Yes, I know the salary is important, and I'm not trying to espouse some socialistic view that money doesn't matter. Yes, you should be paid for. What I'm telling you is why you stay is not because of the money. If your family does not living, or you don't like living where you are, your job won't last. You'll always be looking for the next job. If you feel cheated, and you can put in there disappointed, underappreciated, not supported, paid less than the next guy in there, you'll leave. And it really doesn't matter your salary. You may even leave for a lesser salary somewhere else where you don't feel taken advantage of. And this even goes on to, I got there, and it turns out I take a ton of call, and I get all the worst cases, and I don't get to do any of the cases I want to. If you feel cheated, your job won't last. And finally, this goes in the third one, if you hate it, doesn't matter how much they pay you. It really, really won't match. And you'd be surprised at how many people figure, once again, that money will make them happy. Most of us got this far because we're interested and we sacrificed for years. So I urge you to concentrate on the job that you will have, whether it'll make you satisfied in what you're wanting to do. So let's talk about practice choices. I've been in a private practice model. By the way, private practice models vary tremendously. Some of them pay all the same people the same amount in terms of salary. That works really well if everybody does about the same amount. It really doesn't if somebody is outperforming the other person by twice as much. There are ones that they eat what you kill, meaning it's a pure production model. There's also employed models, and the employed models tend to be a salary guarantee, but some type of production model, something modulating that. Academic practices, and I don't mean whether you're associated with a university, many of us are, I am, but I don't get paid on that basis. If you are, what an academic to me is somebody whose pay depends on their level and time at that. So 5 years at associate level, as opposed to 1 year at a professorial level, very different contracts, or instructor for the first year. So they're paid in a completely different way. Teaching versus not. Once again, this goes back to not so much do you teach resident students and are you an academic? They're very different things. Understand that teaching costs you time during the day, saves you it at night, and it really doesn't get directly compensated for the extra time you spend, very, very rarely. So you do teaching most of the time because you like teaching. I do it because I like teaching, but I don't delude myself into saying I'm getting paid more for teaching. Your market size. So a small town will actually pay you more. If that's where you want to live, great. The larger the city, the less they have to pay you because everybody wants to live there. Once again, I wouldn't base that where I went based on how much they're going to pay me. It's where I want to live for the next 10 or 20 years, where my family's going to be happy. And finally, how do you identify? Are you a general surgeon? Are you a subspecialist that only does bariatric surgery, for instance? Or are you somewhere in between a general surgeon who has a subspecialty area? Both the market size that you go to and how you're paid and your job will depend a lot upon that. And I'll tell you right now, there are a lot more jobs for general surgeons out there that do something else than there are for specialists. We're way overtraining in terms of people who want to do just colorectal or just surgical oncology, and there are fewer jobs out there for that. So how you view yourself and what you see in your practice will matter tremendously. So one of my partners described sort of maturation of a surgeon, saying in 5-year increments, and this is a very generalized idea, but every 5 years you kind of achieve something else, and we're talking out in practice, finish residency, finish fellowship. First 5 years, you're really finding your way. Some people do it faster than others, but you really probably aren't a fully formed general surgeon until at least 5 years, and you really don't hit your stride until probably around 10 years. Employers know that, and they know that they need to support you, or at least the enlightened ones do. And they're getting better about that. 10 years ago, people kind of expected everyone to keep up at the race and the pace that they were at when they hired them, and more people are understanding that. So are you the only colorectal surgeon going to a group that needs to establish something? And who's going to help you when you run into problems? How are they going to generate business for you? So if you are going into, say, bariatrics and the community has a 9-month waiting period to get in to see it, there's your answer. On the other hand, if you're going in as a, say, minimally invasive foregut surgeon, there's 2 others, it's going to take you a while to build up your practice. A lot of times you can figure out how busy you're going to be because your guaranteed salary, if they're going to pay you a lot, they kind of expect you to work. On the other hand, if you see it a little lower, the expectations are lower, you understand that your business is going to grow slower. And the idea of building a practice is somewhat foreign to a lot of the newer generation. They figure we show up, we get to work right out of the completely busy, my schedule will be booked. It really doesn't happen that way. Will the other surgeons support you? I've got a difficult case, can you scrub in? I've never done one, I've done 2 of these before, I'd like some help. If that rarely happens, kind of a reason maybe not to go there. If they say, hey, there's 5, 10 of us around, call any of us anytime. How committed is the practice, the hospital, whoever's going to employ you? So I had a resident who went out. She went to her hometown. There were 4 general surgeons, all over 60, all looked like they could retire at any minute. Some of them looked like they could be in the grave at any minute. But and she thought this was a great sort of idea. She saw herself as a general surgeon. They saw her as a woman who would do breast surgery and wait around. The other 4 people were in private practice. They had no reason to welcome her. And it came down to the institution wanted her, but they had no idea how to support her, how to get patients into her office. Even though she was the future, there was no vision of how to get her to be the future. So how they see helping you get to be where you want to be is key. By the way, a lot of times, the first time they're hiring someone, even now and today, systems aren't good at this. They haven't been doing it for 10 years and supporting people. So part of you as you go through this process is looking, say, have they done this before? And are they experienced in bringing someone on? So let's talk a little bit more about what's in a contract. Salary versus production. So production means we measure how much you work. And also, how do you measure production? Where I went out to practice, the only production that mattered was money that got paid to me. So somehow I got all the uninsured patients, and that wasn't the same. And at the end of the day, RVUs measure work, but they don't measure collections. So how they tally up how hard you worked is very important. There are other things in a contract that can sweeten it. Signing bonus, loan forgiveness is a big one. One of my residents is talking about has heavy debt, going into a fellowship that may take a job in rural surgery because she'll get it paid off in 3 years and then she can go and do what she needs. Actually makes sense. Non-compete clauses. These are scary to a lot of people. They usually say things like you cannot practice any of your trade within 15 miles of any office or place of business. So if it's a city or practice that you're going to, and if you leave, you're leaving the city, non-compete doesn't matter. You can leave at any time. This is to protect the employer. They bring you on, they pay you well for a couple of years, and you say, thank you, I've developed my practice, I'm gonna move across town, and they wanna be paid back. And sometimes there's a way you can pay them back a reasonable amount. Usually these extend from 1 to 2 years, and depending on the state, sometimes they're enforceable, sometimes they're not. But they're the scary thing, but there's sometimes somebody you can negotiate out of the contract. And a big one, the initial versus a permanent contract. The one you'll see originally usually makes you an employee, even if it's a private practice group, because you're gonna be an employee for somewhere between 1 to 5 years. Not a bad thing, mind you, just a reality. What's your permanent contract look like? And the other great one I've heard about a lot, especially by several for-profit hospitals with 3 letters that I won't name, seems to do really well on the initial contract, and then the subsequent contract drops off. So you get paid a lot less in your 3rd year. And a lot of the guarantees that I've seen lately only extend to the 1st year or 2. Understand that you go in, this may not be unfair, this may be the reality. They have to offer higher salaries for you to come in and even sign, but by year 2 or 3, they expect you to be generating the income that will pay your salary. And if there's not a plan to get you there, that's where the disconnect is. So a lot of places, and the other thing is, bring you in for 2 years, your family's here, your kids are in school, harder to move, so they have you. And that's the ugly part of the initial versus permanent contract. So here's some perspective from bringing in a new partner. We're going to lose money on you for the first couple years. You will not be nearly as efficient as somebody who's been doing this 10 years. You will pick some of the wrong patients to operate on, and the outcomes won't be what you want them to be. They need to be a mentor to you. They need to be a lot of things. They need to be available for it. If they don't get this, think about the job again. They're thinking you better be worth it. That's why they're putting a contract in there, because you may not be. And every person you hire, even though they're a good person, and they may even be a good surgeon, one of my new partners is very good at that, but he's incredibly slow. He is always 2 hours behind in the office. A little bit of a problem. They want a contract that'll protect them. And a couple things. A contract is a first offer. Some of the things in there you're not going to be able to negotiate. At my institution, you cannot negotiate the payment method, which is fairly complex based on a percentage and this and that. But you can negotiate the starting salary and the relocation fees. And one of the questions somebody asked me the other night was, how many times can a guy go back and forth? Not so much that you annoy them, but enough that they understand. Some contracts you really can't negotiate. Most you can, and most understand that it's a first offer. And some of the things they may not care about. You say, take away the non-compete, I really don't like it. They go, yeah, I don't care. We're the only business in town. If you leave, you're leaving. Seek support. And this is what the job I've done for years for my residents. This is the one that people always feel like a lawyer will help them at this point. Not exactly true unless you have a lawyer who's done contracts for surgeons and understands production. They're not going to help you that much. They can explain terms to you, but personally, I haven't found them necessary. I think they're more necessary the more value you have in the practice if you're trying to sell it. That, I'd certainly do it. And remember, the real purpose of the contract is to protect both of you. It establishes expectations, it establishes what is fair. And if you don't get anything else out of this, understand your contract. Understand the limits, understand how they pay you, understand what they value. If they don't put in the contract and they don't value it, it's probably not going to be something that they can hold you to. For instance, if they don't say anything about teaching and you say, I don't want to teach, they can't hold you to it. Final thoughts. This is all real scary, I think, to people who haven't signed these. You'll be okay. Be realistic in your expectations. There are no perfect jobs. Understand that you are not a finished product, and it is a learning process going through this. And once again, read and understand your own contract. Thank you from Roanoke, Virginia.